Picture this. The year is 1191. We're standing in a muddy pit on the grounds of Glastonbury Abbey, 16 feet below the surface where the world continues on, oblivious. The air is cold and heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and something else. A kind of metallic reverence. You can hear the strained breathing of the monks, the soft squelch of their boots in the mud as they pry at the lid of a massive, hollowed-out log coffin. The wood groans, splintering after centuries of silence. And then, they see it. Inside lies a skeleton of a giant, a man who would have been nearly 7 feet tall, the skull bearing the ghastly, unmistakable evidence of a fatal head wound. Beside him, a smaller, more delicate frame, and nestled in the hollow of her skull, a lock of impossibly preserved golden hair. Witnesses would later swear they saw it. Strands of pristine hair that, when touched by the damp air, instantly crumbled to nothing. Between them, a final damning piece of evidence, a crude cross made of lead. The inscription is clear: Hic iacet sepultus, inclitus rex, Arturius, in insula Avalonia. Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. They found him, the once and future king. It's the perfect discovery, a miracle brought to light. But what if it wasn't a miracle? What if the body in this grave, the one that would define history, was just part of a story born from desperation, from fire, and from a calculated lie that would echo for 1,000 years? To find the real Arthur, the actual man of blood and bone, we must first understand the anatomy of this perfect deception. And to do that, we have to go back to a time of chaos, smoke, and a strange, deafening silence where our hero should have been. And now, please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. Before the grave, before the legend, before the lie, there was the world that supposedly created the man. To find Arthur, we have to leave the relative comfort of the 12th century and plunge backwards into the suffocating darkness of the 5th and 6th. Imagine a world unraveling. The Roman legions, the only real source of order for 400 years, are gone. Britain is bleeding. Waves of Saxon invaders are crashing onto the eastern shores, and there is no one left to stop them. From this age of chaos, of fire and slaughter, only one contemporary British voice survives to tell us what it was like. A furious, ranting cleric named Gildas. In his work, A Sermon of Fire and Brimstone, called On the Ruin and Conquest of Britain, he doesn't spare us the details. He wants us to see it, to smell it. He writes of the tops of lofty towers tumbled to the ground, of holy altars desecrated, and in a description that turns the stomach, of fragments of human bodies covered with livid clots of coagulated blood, looking as if they had been squeezed together in a press. But Gildas also speaks of a turning point, a moment of hope in the darkness, a great, stunning victory for the Britons at a place called Mount Badon, a battle so decisive it stopped the Saxon advance for a generation. This was it, the pivotal battle of the age, the single event that would later become the cornerstone of Arthur's entire legend. Gildas names the petty tyrants he despises. He rails against the sinners leading his people to ruin. He gives us names. But there is one name he never, ever writes. The name of the commander who led the Britons to this impossible victory. Not once. In the only surviving eyewitness account of the war that defined an era, the hero is completely, utterly missing. It's a terrifying void at the heart of the story. A ghost where a king should be. So if the man isn't in the pages of history, where do we look? What if the only evidence he left behind was buried in the earth? And it is in the earth that the first clues begin to surface. If you want to find the ghost of a king, you go to the places where power was once absolute. Forget the crumbling medieval castle you see today on the windswept cliffs of Tintagel. That came much later. We're going deeper. Archaeologists have peeled back the layers of history on this jagged headland, digging down into the dark earth of the 5th and 6th centuries. And what they found there is staggering. They uncovered the foundations of a massive, high-status complex. We're talking about stone walls 3 feet thick, forming huge rectangular buildings. A settlement on a scale almost unimaginable for post-Roman Britain. This wasn't some crude chieftain's hovel. This was a citadel, a place of immense wealth and power. But it's what they found inside that truly shocks. Not coarse, local pottery. They found over 150 fragments of the finest glass and ceramic ware from the far side of the world. High-end amphorae that carried wine and olive oil from Turkey. Delicate glass goblets from Spain. Think about that. Here, on the absolute edge of a collapsed world, someone was living like a Roman emperor, feasting and drinking while the rest of Britain burned. And then, in 1998, they found the clue that changes everything. A simple piece of slate used to cover a drain with a 6th century Latin inscription scratched into it. On it, a name, Artugnu, a name etymologically linked to Arthur. It's not a direct hit, and historians rightly caution us, but it's a whisper, a ghost in the stone, a fortress of immense size, a court drinking wine from the far corners of the old empire, a name that hangs in the air like a shadow. Can you imagine the kind of leader who commanded this place? A man of such power and influence that history somehow forgot to write down his name? The evidence at Tintagel is shocking, but it's not the only site. Further inland, another brooding hill fort held an even bigger secret, a clue that pointed not just to a leader, but to a ruler of truly epic proportions. That whisper of a powerful leader on the Cornish coast wasn't an isolated echo. We move inland to another brooding hill fort that has scarred the landscape of Somerset for millennia, Cadbury Castle. This is the other great contender for the real Camelot, and the evidence here is even more stark, even more suggestive of a leader with near absolute power. Forget the myths for a second. Let's talk about the numbers, because the numbers don't lie. Excavations in the 1,960 seconds revealed that during the 6th century, the ancient Iron Age defenses were massively refortified. We're talking about a defended area larger than any other known fort from the period. A ring of stone and timber built with a level of manpower that is simply staggering for a collapsed society. But it's at the very summit of the hill that the most chilling piece of the puzzle was found. Archaeologists uncovered the post holes, the architectural footprint of a vast timber building. A great hall. Its dimensions? A cavernous 20 meters by 10 meters, or 66 by 33 feet. This wasn't a fort. It was a statement. This was a king's court. A place to feast hundreds of warriors, to project power and dominance over the entire region. And just like at Tintagel, they found the same impossible clue: shards of pottery from the eastern Mediterranean. The leader at Cadbury was part of the exact same exclusive international trade network. The pattern is undeniable now. 2 separate sites, hundreds of miles apart, both showing evidence of a fabulously wealthy, immensely powerful British leader operating at the exact time of Arthur. We have the fortresses, we have the Great Hall, we have the imported riches, we have the shadow of his kingdom. But what about the man himself? What did a warrior of this age, a commander of this stature, actually look like? As it turns out, in 2018, we found one. And the forensic evidence is more revealing than any legend. The shadows of powerful leaders at Tintagel and Cadbury are compelling, but they are just that: shadows. Architectural ghosts. To understand the man, you need a body. For centuries, we had nothing. And then, in 2018, near a hilltop overlooking the Thames in Marlow, we found one. What was unearthed was not a king from a legend, but something far more tangible, far more real. A single, isolated grave, and inside, a warrior from the 6th century who brings the entire myth crashing down to earth. Let's open the forensic file on the Marlow warlord. For the first time, you can see him, not as a character, but as a set of cold, hard facts. Forensic analysis of his skeleton reveals a man who stood 6 feet tall. To our modern sensibilities, that's just tall. In the 6th century, he was a giant. a towering, intimidating figure who would have physically dominated every room he entered, every battlefield he strode onto. His bones show the clear evidence of a robust physique, of a life of hard, physical conflict. And he was buried with the tools of his trade, a long iron sword, still resting in its preserved scabbard of wood and leather, spears, bronze and glass vessels. This was a man of immense status, a commander, a killer. No, this is not the body of Arthur. But this is the verifiable blueprint. This is the physical proof that men exactly like the legendary Arthur existed. Men of incredible stature, armed to the teeth, holding positions of immense power. We now have the fortresses, we have the proof of their wealth, and now we have the body of the warrior himself. The physical evidence is all there, a perfect silhouette of a hero. But the name itself, the one that would echo through eternity, remained a ghost until, hundreds of years later, it wasn't. We have the body of the warrior. We have the fortresses. We have the perfect silhouette of a hero, but the name itself, that remained a ghost until, suddenly, it wasn't. After 300 years of absolute, deafening silence, the name appears. In the 9th century, a Welsh monk named Nennius compiles a work called the Historia Brittonum. And there, for the first time in any surviving text, we read it, Arthur. But this isn't the triumphant discovery you might think it is. You have to ask the question, why then? Why, after 10 generations of silence, does this name suddenly surface in the historical record? This isn't a breakthrough. This is a clue that the story is being manipulated. And look closer at what Nennius actually writes. He doesn't call Arthur a king. That's the critical detail. He calls him a dux bellorum, a leader of battles, a warlord. He's describing the exact type of man we found buried at Marlow. Then, a century later, the Annales Cambriae gives us 2 dates, one for a victory at Badon, and one for a battle at Camelot, where Arthur and a man named Medraut fell. That's it. A few lines, written 300 and 400 years after the fact. The Historia Brittonum even gives Arthur a convenient resume, a neat list of 12 great victories. It feels less like history and more like the beginning of a legend. A story being carefully, deliberately constructed long after all the witnesses are dust. A warlord's name, plucked from obscurity after centuries and attached to a list of heroic deeds. It's a small spark, but a spark is all you need to start a fire. And what was coming next wasn't just a story. It was a propaganda masterpiece, an act of literary genius that would take this obscure warlord and forge him into the king we think we know today. That spark, the bare whisper of a warlord's name found in the margins of history, was all one man needed to start a wildfire. In the 1,130 seconds, a cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth unleashes a book upon the world, a supposed history of the kings of Britain, and it is one of the most brilliant and successful pieces of propaganda ever written. Geoffrey takes the shadowy figure of Arthur, the dux bellorum, and performs a stunning act of historical alchemy. He doesn't just record history, he invents it, wholesale. In his pages, the obscure warlord is transformed into a magnificent king, the head of a pan-European empire. Suddenly, Arthur has a court of shining knights. He has a magical sword, Excalibur, given to him from a mystical lake. He has a wizardly advisor, Merlin, and he has a beautiful, tragic queen, Guinevere. Every single element that we now consider essential to the Arthurian legend, every piece of the Camelot myth, springs fully formed from the mind of this one man. The book was a medieval blockbuster, a runaway success. It gave the Normans and the Britons a glorious, heroic past to rival the legends of Charlemagne or Rome. It was the creation of a national icon. The process was complete. The shadowy warlord had been laundered, his brutal, bloody reality erased and replaced with the shining veneer of a chivalrous king. The myth was now born, and it was more powerful, more seductive, and more real to people than the man ever could have been. Geoffrey of Monmouth had done more than write a book. He had created a national treasure. And like any treasure, it was something people would become desperate to possess, something they would be willing to lie for, to dig for, especially when their entire world was about to go up in flames. The myth was now more real than the man. A shining king, a perfect court, a national hero. Geoffrey's propaganda had saturated the culture of Britain, and there was one place on earth that claimed to be the heart of that myth: Glastonbury Abbey. You have to understand, Glastonbury wasn't just a church. In the 12th century, it was a vast, sprawling powerhouse, one of the wealthiest and most powerful institutions in Christendom. Its history deliberately tied to the earliest days of British Christianity and, more importantly, to the mythical Isle of Avalon itself. It was untouchable. It was eternal. And then, on the night of May 25th, 1184, it burned. The fire was catastrophic. It didn't just damage the abbey, it utterly consumed it. The great church, the priceless relics, the magnificent library, all of it turned to ash and blackened timber. In a single night, it was all gone. Their entire world, their source of immense wealth and political power, had been reduced to rubble and crippling debt. The steady stream of pilgrims and their donations had dried to a trickle. The monks' own chronicles from the time paint a picture of absolute despair. They were ruined, facing a financial abyss from which there was no obvious escape. They needed more than just a rebuilding fund. They needed a miracle. They needed something spectacular, something so profound it would not just invite the world back, but command it to come. They needed a story that would make Glastonbury the most important pilgrimage site in all of Europe. And standing there, amidst the ruins and the ashes, a story is exactly what they would decide to create. And so, 7 years after the fire, with the abbey still in ruins and the monks still desperate, they begin to dig. Now you understand the motive. Now you see the stage. And now we return to that muddy pit, 16 feet below the ground, but this time we see it for what it truly was. This wasn't a holy revelation. It was the scene of a crime. Let's deconstruct the miracle. They claimed an ancient Welsh bard told them exactly where to dig. How convenient. They claimed to find a massive coffin containing 2 skeletons that perfectly matched the legend of a giant king and his queen. How perfect. And then there's the centerpiece of the whole performance: the lead cross. That crude, ancient cross with the perfectly legible inscription. Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur. Modern analysis has shown the lettering style is consistent with the 12th century, not the 6th. It was almost as if it was made to be found. This wasn't an archaeological discovery. It was a masterpiece of deception, overseen by the very men who stood to gain everything from it. The most famous piece of physical evidence for King Arthur, the one that cemented his place in history, was a fraud. Think about the cold, cynical reality of what that means. They needed money, so they dug up an old, forgotten grave, a real grave containing the bodies of 2 unknown and long-dead people. They desecrated their remains, stripped them of their anonymity, and slapped a famous name on them to create a medieval tourist attraction. The horror here isn't a ghost in a grave. The horror is deeply, disturbingly human. It's the story of power, greed, and the calculated abuse of faith. It's the moment the myth became a product to be sold. They manufactured a miracle out of bone and lies. And the most disturbing part of all? It worked perfectly. But that raises one final haunting question. If the greatest proof of Arthur was a lie, why do we still want to believe it so badly? The Glastonbury lie worked so perfectly for one simple, powerful reason. A nation needed it to be true. The 12th century was a time of conflict and shifting identity. Both the ruling Normans and the subjugated Britons were desperate for a unifying hero, a legendary king from a glorious past they could both claim as their own. The monks of Glastonbury didn't just offer them a story. They offered them a body, a tangible piece of proof that their greatest hero was real and that he belonged to them, to their land. It was the most successful marketing campaign in history. but that was their need. What about ours? Take a moment and ask yourself, honestly, why did you click on this? Why are we, even now, nearly 1,000 years later, still so captivated by the fantasy? Why do we still search for Camelot, knowing it never existed? The truth, the final, haunting truth, is that the legend of King Arthur, as we know him, the noble king, the round table, the shining city on the hill owes far more to a devastating fire and a financially motivated fraud than it does to any real historical warlord. We have searched for the man, and what we have found is the anatomy of a perfect myth. The real king, the brutal dux bellorum of the 6th century, is gone, lost forever to the silence of history. But the lie, the glorious, beautiful lie they built upon a stranger's bones that proved to be immortal.